Attention in the auditorium, please take your seat. Presentation will begin in 3 minutes. As a reminder, please silence all electronic devices. The presentation is about to begin.
Good morning. So here we are back in Polifka again together. I didn't introduce myself last time apparently, so thanks whoever left that piece of feedback. But Wally Lazinski, I'm just kidding, that's the other squadron commander. So Colonel Jason True, I go by Toga, and I'm more excited about today, to be honest with you. It's something I'm a lot more familiar with, and a lot more comfortable with than the National Defense Strategy. I do have to admit, like I have to the Knights, I'm the commander of the Knights, I am what people call a fragile perfect. That means I like to get things just as perfect as I think I can get them before I show anyone else, right? Because feedback hurts sometimes, it stings. I'm glad I didn't trip on that. But at the same time, I try my best to be a good designer. And there's a principle in design that you show people your work before it's fully finished. And so this is a prototype briefing that I hope to give to the future classes. And that briefing will be shaped by the feedback that you give me. So I'm looking forward to that. But it is a briefing with an idea that's not fully fleshed out and a presentation that's not fully memorized. I haven't used note cards since the 90s, but we're going to go with that today. And a worksheet that's untested. So, what could go wrong, right? And that's a rhetorical question, but I'm sure everyone will let me know exactly what I did wrong in the app. So I look forward to reading it, honestly. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm here to ask you to do something bold. We are going to rescue Icarus. Now, as you probably remember, the legend of Icarus and his father Daedalus starts in the ancient Mediterranean Sea on an island. Daedalus is a master builder, and he has been hired by a king to create this inescapable labyrinth. Well, the king then ends up putting Daedalus and his son Icarus in the labyrinth, and to escape, Daedalus makes 2 sets of wings from feathers and wax. And they take off on a flight that is mentioned in almost every single history book on aviation. Before they leave, however, the father warns the son to stay focused and to stay low. But as the story goes, Icarus is overjoyed by the thrill of flight, and he goes higher and higher and higher until he gets so close to the sun that the wax melts, the wings disintegrate, and the boy falls to his death. So naturally then, we tend to point at Icarus as a fool, as someone who got too close to the realm of the gods, a youth without discipline. And he's a warning to others to stay low, where it's familiar and where it's comfortable and where it's safe. On the other hand, we honor Daedalus. So who has seen this statue? Yep, it's right in front of the Maxwell Club. So it honors the National Order of the Daedalians, an organization of military flyers that was started after World War I and is named after Daedalus. Here's another monument to Daedalus at Randolph Air Force Base. And these are just two of the ways that we honor Daedalus and what he stands for. He's pragmatic, he's rational, he's a technical expert. So we uphold the father and we forget the child. And we need to change that, I think, because rescuing the reputation of Icarus will help us encourage innovation. It will help us be better at innovating, and it will help you understand maybe a little bit about our organizational heritage. So let me briefly tell you how I would have taken all this when I was a student at SOS. Okay, innovation, sure, got it. Everyone knows that. We got it. Icarus, no, the dead guy. And our organizational culture, heritage, I don't know if I would care so much about that. I've learned since then, though, why that's wrong. Why you need both Daedalus and Icarus if you want radical innovation, and why airmen, why you have an inherent advantage in the innovation game. So we're going to talk about what innovation is, and we'll go briefly through all of these parts, and we'll get some Iron Maiden at the end. Okay, innovation is not invention. Invention is a creative act. We make something new, whether it's an object, an artifact, or if it's an idea. Innovation is when we take that new thing and we develop it and we integrate it into what we do. And we hear this word a lot. I mean, you cannot spend a day at SOS without hearing the word innovation over and over and over and over again. And not only do we hear about how crucial it is, we hear how it is apparently really hard for us to do. Right? So here's some actual headlines. And so we hear how to fix this problem, and we are told things like, oh, just be creative. And be creative and be out of the box. And be creative and be out of the box and build an innovation ecosystem. And not only that, but you need to fail fast. And not only fail fast, but you need to fail forward and learn to draw and orbit the hairball and brainstorm and steal like artists, take improv, work with others, work alone, misspell works, thought the first and middle, and it's a little overwhelming, right? So, well-meaning airmen have gone out into this commercial world in an attempt to help us understand how they do innovation, and they've brought back a lot of the buzzwords and catchphrases that I just used, including another one which has gotten a lot of attention both inside the military and out. So raise your hand if you've heard the word design. I imagine pretty much everyone has heard that word. Okay, so if I asked you to define it, would you tell me it is a noun? Would you tell me it is an adjective? Is it a verb? If I asked you for an example, would you say it's an architectural blueprint? Would you say it's a piece of fashionable clothing? Would you say it's a planning process? None of those definitions are wrong. It's just that design is one of those words. It's too slippery to submit itself to one all-encompassing definition. So let's talk about design in relation to a specific field, our own field of the military art and science. Who here has heard the term operational design? Okay, it's part of what we used to call JOP, Joint Operation Planning Process. Now we just call it joint planning. This came out of an old document when it was called JOP. It's got this neat schematic, and we still have this part of it. It's this linear process for coming up with a plan for a mission. And just to be clear, so operational design is part of that, but that's not what I'm talking about today. You will talk about that here at SOS. That's not exactly what I'm talking about. Let's talk briefly about design in a different context. Who has heard the term design thinking? Okay. All right. Design thinking is where we take the methods of artists and architects and other professions that kind of fall under this category of designers, and we see if we can use their methods for doing all sorts of deliberate innovation. Okay? There's one model. One of the main models comes out of Stanford. You may have seen this: empathize, define, ideate, prototype, and test. There are other models. There's actually a lot of models. Yeah. And I mean to poke fun at this, but I dig it, right? I like design thinking. About a month ago, we had the opportunity to hang out with the company that actually coined the term design thinking out in Silicon Valley. And then we got a chance to talk to an engineer at Google X on how they're building the self-driving cars using design thinking. And I got to hang out with the president of Pixar for about an hour about how his team uses design thinking. And again, so I'm a fan of this when it is used in the right context. And I'm not entirely sure that for this audience that design thinking is as useful as it is, say, creating the computer mouse. Okay? Now, let me clarify something. As officers, you care about innovation. As humans, you care about innovation. And I want you to be able to take either one of these processes and use it, put it into play. But I'm not so much worried about the method. I'm more worried about the mindset. Okay? And that's where the myth comes back in. So I'm going to use Daedalus on the left and Icarus on the right to represent two different sets of forces. It's an oversimplification, I know. But I think what we gain in utility is more than makes up for the deficiencies. So on the left, we have Daedalus. And he represents the practical, the rational, and the scientific. The counterforce to that is on the right. It's Icarus. He represents playfulness and romanticism and artistry. We tend to be less comfortable with Icarus, right? I know I am. And that is why, I don't know if you knew this, but Flex used to be called Icarus. So that we would remind students the dire consequences of not taking your job seriously. And there was even a famous study by a think tank, RAND, that said that Air Force officers, it critiqued Air Force officers for enjoying their job too much. And they called it the Icarus syndrome. Well, I've had the opportunity to study innovations in leadership and technology and strategy for the last 7 years. And one thing is perfectly clear to me, and that is you need both. I'll give you a couple examples from the history of technology. The Wright brothers, famous for their attention to detail and their business minds. But they were inspired by a toy helicopter their dad brought home when they were children. Gunpowder, first invented for use in fireworks, for entertainment. The first cell phones. The look of the first cell phone was inspired by the science fiction TV show Star Trek. The advanced communications we all enjoy today, right, the one we all use in our job, were accelerated by amateur hobbyists just playing around in the mid-20th century. So while airmen tend to be biased against Icarus, there are others out there in this world that are inspired by him explicitly. And this may strike you as strange. After all, the dude dies, right? But one of the things I've learned is that that's only one version of the myth. And the other versions of the myth, he actually survives the fall, as depicted here. And even when he doesn't survive the fall, oftentimes the moral of the story is reversed. And he's honored as a hero for his boldness and his creativity and his playfulness. Okay, so maybe you're thinking to yourself, this still sounds silly, maybe even dangerous. So let me clarify. When I talk about rescuing Icarus, I don't mean that we value him in place of his father. I just mean that we elevate his image and balance both of them together. I mean, we take a cue out of the playbook of improv artists and we say, yes, and, right, instead of either or. And we do that because we need to be able to hold these two divergent ideas in creative tension. We need a type of executive awareness that kind of sits above both Daedalus and Icarus to balance them, right? This dynamic balance between the two of them. We need a cognitive skill that's probably more familiar to you than operational design or design thinking or Greek myths. And I'm talking simply about a strategic mindset. Okay, so that's the mindset I want to talk about. When I say strategic in this context, I don't mean long range like strategic bombers of World War II. I don't mean a level of war like as opposed to the operational or tactical levels of war. And I don't mean a level of planning, like the National Defense Strategy, and I don't mean a level of leadership, like the strategic level, the executives. I think that anyone, anywhere, at any time can think more or less strategically, which is why we teach strategic thinking to captains, right? Not because you're going to solve the problem of North Korea, but when you go buy a new car, you could think more or less strategically. Okay, so if strategic does not mean any of those things, what does it mean? It's defined in a lot of different ways. Here, I just pulled a few bullets out of things that I have read that I think get it right. You know, this idea that a strategic mindset, if you are a strategic thinker, that you can break things apart, put them back together in new and creative ways, that you're thinking of the big picture, that you're humble, you're curious, and that you have a deal of imagination and empathy. And when I say empathy, I mean not just the fact that you care for other people, but the fact that you can get into someone else's mind, whether it be someone on your team or an opponent, to anticipate what they're going to do next. But I do want to suggest an even more familiar concept to you. I think a strategic mindset is a playful mindset. Now, what do I mean by play? Play is a word that's harder to define than design. But all those pictures that you saw as you walked in, where it said, what do these pictures have in common? The answer to that was play. Children play, athletes play, musicians play, we play games for fun, but we also play games we also play in other ways. We play with ideas, we play to experiment, we play to explore. We play when it comes to the essence of what we do as defense professionals, right? When we plan something out, we war game it, right? To play out the possibilities. And sometimes we play tricks on our enemies, right? To get what we want. So in fact, I want to shift for just a moment from thinking about strategic as an adjective describing a way we think to strategy as a noun, a theory of victory. It is often hard to figure out whether an author is talking about strategy or play. So we're going to play a game. I'm going to show 6 quotes. If you think the missing word is strategy, then I want you to stand. If you think the missing word is play, then I want you to sit. And at the end, I want to see if anyone gets all 6 right. Okay, we ready? All right, so here's the first quote. One person thinks it's about strategy. Okay. All right. All right, ready? Here's the next one. So if you think this one, the missing word is strategy, then stay standing or stand up. All right, here's the third one. Here's the fourth one. So again, if it's about strategy, stand up. The quote's behind you too if you need to see. Here's the other one. And that should be the last one. All right, let's see how you did. Starting with the first quote, every other one was about strategy. And obviously the other ones were about play. Did anyone get all 6? So, to me, they are fairly identical, which is how I even came across this in the first place. I was doing 2 separate research projects, one having to do with play, one having to do with strategy, and I kept forgetting which lines came out of which documents. So let me just recap so far where we are. We talked about there is a desire and a need for deliberate innovation, and how the idea of design has been used to meet that need, both in the military world and the commercial world. And that design process, that method, requires a certain mindset. And that mindset has to be able to hold 2 different types of forces in creative tension at the same time. And that those forces can be symbolized by Daedalus and Icarus. And that we need some sort of strategic thinking that balances the father's pragmatic rationality and the son's passionate creativity. And that strategic thinking can be a subset of a playful activity. So play, again, can be many things. All those pictures that we showed are examples of play. But here's a few examples of ideas of skills that are valued by both strategic thinkers and designers. Empathy, imagination, social intelligence, and prototyping. And they're all just, in a way, forms of play. Playing with perspectives, playing with possibilities, playing well with others, and exploratory play. And like Icarus, which there's a lot of people who value Icarus explicitly, a lot of people value play. And not just for childhood development or recreation, but for hard scientific research, for technological advancement, and for strategy. So these are all quotes by famous dead dudes. This last one is Albert Einstein, saying that the essential feature in what he did was playfulness, was playing with the ideas. All right, and that gets us to number 4, the missing pieces. So all that to say that innovation requires a type of play. But that's not it. Innovation requires a type of play that is inherent in Air Force culture. We naturally, as airmen, are playful in at least 3 ways that I will describe. Storytelling, what I call the indirect approach, or it's called the indirect approach, and what I'll call irreverence. So let me start with storytelling. Storytelling is a type of cognitive play. So if you pull back the research and all the literature on storytelling, they describe it as a form of cognitive play. And both military strategists and designers will talk about the fact to think in terms of narratives and the ability to craft stories is what they call the original virtual reality technology. And engaging in stories increases our empathy, our creativity, and our motivation. It increases our ability to make sense of complicated and complex environments. Our basic doctrine, Air Force basic doctrine, even tells us that one of the core skills of an Air Force officer is the ability to tell the Air Force story. It turns out, in World War I, those aviators were well known for their storytelling. So I've read every single available English language journal and diary from this period. And one thing is clear. In the spaces between fighting, and there were lots of those spaces, they did a lot of things that we would call play. They played games, they'd play cards, they would gamble, they would play instruments, they'd play sports, they'd put on plays, and then they would engage in the playful activity of storytelling. They would tell technical stories about how to get the most out of their primitive aircraft. They would tell tactical stories about what happened in their last sortie. They would tell these wild, fanciful stories about how they saw the world differently, literally and metaphorically. And still today, we have Air Force units that set aside time to tell stories, right? We have fighter squadrons that have roll call. We have the 2 NCOs out of Incirlik Air Base that started the Air Force storytelling program. It's kind of like a TED Talk kind of a thing. And then the second point is directly related to this. Those airmen went home and they started telling more strategic stories about how to avoid the bloody stalemate of World War I. So after that war, a famous theorist wrote that in strategy, the longest way around is often the shortest way there. So what he means by that longest way, let me give you an example. You can put it in terms of a cumulative approach versus a sequential approach. So a sequential approach, a sequence. I start at A, I go A, B, C, D, all the way till I get to Z, and I stop. A cumulative approach is where you try different things, and you see what happens. Okay, it's playful in a way. So in Europe, World War II, we marched the Brits and the US forces across the continent till we get to Berlin. We meet in the middle with the Russians. We take the keys from Hitler, we break his toys, and we say, you can't play anymore, right? That was a very sequential approach. In the Pacific, we try the same thing, right? We start at Island A, and we're going to march our way all the way until we get to Z, the big island of Japan. We get to Tokyo, we're going to take the keys, break their toys, and say, you can't play this game anymore. But airmen think about this differently, right? They want to try different things. They're like, hey, can we hit B and C at the same time? Or what if we hit H and K before we even go through A through whatever? Okay? It doesn't work in the European theater. They try it. It really doesn't have time to work. By the time they get to the Pacific, it does work, right? We get Japan to capitulate before we have to do the bloody march all the way up all those island chains. And we do have the benefit in the Pacific theater of advanced technology, right? We have the B-29, we have the atomic weapon by that point. And if you think about today, we have the ability to do this even better, right? So technology has kind of caught up with these early airmen's ideas. And we can do what one theorist described as not fighting our way through the hands to get to the heart, not this destruction of the enemy armed forces, but we can bypass the population, the fielded forces, and just put a bullet in the brain. This is captured today still by the five-ring theory, which still inspires kind of our effects-based operations approach. And this came out of, as you probably know, John Warden's idea that was practiced in Desert Storm. He'll be here in a couple weeks to talk to you about this. I had that picture, but I thought that one looked a lot more playful, so I used that one. And this doesn't seem like play in a way, but play is not necessarily fun. Play is about experimenting and trying different things and thinking through how the enemy is going to think about something to affect them at a systemic level. All right. The third thing is one I'll call irreverence. That is where you consider the object of the game is the rules of the game itself. So they're themselves at play. And people will think, they'll talk about this as a part of our organizational culture that still exists today. They'll typically reference something superficial like uniforms or the fact that pilots are infamous for not caring about military discipline. This was a quote out of the Korean War. And or they'll point to things like the motto of the Air Corps Tactical School, which is, Air University has evolved today from the Air Corps Tactical School. We make progress unhindered by custom. Like, we don't care about the past, we're just going forward. Or, of course, they'll point to this guy, right, as an example of irreverence. But this is deeper, right? This idea of irreverence is deeper than just mustaches and mottos. Innovation is about breaking the mold. It's about breaking the status quo, about shifting paradigms, okay? You can't do that if you assume that the current system you operate under is sacred. You have to assume that the rules of the game are themselves at play. And early airmen were clearly willing to question the rules of the game. They were willing to move to Montgomery, Alabama, before there was air conditioning, just to get out from underneath the Army leaders who had a dogmatic and limited view of the role of air power. Right? They wanted to break away so that they could change the rules of the game. All right, so in addition to storytelling and the indirect approach and irreverence, there's one other clue that our organizational heritage has, values the type of play that we now know is useful for innovation. The type of play exemplified by Icarus. It's because they never shied away from using Icarus's name themselves. Hap Arnold called Icarus the test pilot of the Air Force. Airmen wrote letters home about the value of Icarus. The Air Force Academy today still has a journal of creative writing named Icarus. But apart from that Academy journal and a statue at Wright Pat Air Force Base, we've largely forgotten the legacy of Icarus as a hero. I have no doubt that our struggle to recapture that spirit of innovation, to create strategic thinkers, is linked to the way that we undervalue the ideals that Icarus represented. Bold, even foolish passion for what we do. An ability to play with wild ideas. An ability to take a problem and turn it on its side and go over the maze instead of just through it. Right? We need to rescue the reputation of Icarus and honor both him and his father. And here's one reason why. No one ever talks about what happens next in the myth. Right? We know Icarus dies. Right? What happens to the father? He's the most capable craftsman in all the world, according to the myth. He never invents anything ever again. Ever. He needs Icarus for perspective, for inspiration, and for balance. And so do we. Okay? So as good critical thinkers, I'm sure you're asking yourself, okay, maybe I buy this, maybe I don't. What the hell do you want me to do with this? Right? So let's talk about the worksheet. The worksheet. So I'm going to describe how to do it, and you're going to do it on your own. But you can ask me questions afterwards or later on. We've talked about that right attitude, this playful, strategic attitude, and now we're going to talk a little bit more about the actions. All right? So you're working on your insight paper, and essentially you need a vehicle for producing a couple different options, and then you'll go to deliberate decision making, and then you'll try to be able to pick between those options that you've come up with. So this is a method, a worksheet, an exercise to help you with that. You've gone through the process essentially up to this point where you need to create some COAs or ideate some options. Right? So that's what we're going to talk about. You came, hopefully, with the first side filled in. The middle, section A, you've sketched the problem. Now, why do we say sketch? It's because supposedly, and in my experience, it works out pretty well, you start drawing lines on paper, and it kind of unlocks a different part of your brain. Okay? And then, B, the why chain. So this is a technique that designers like to use called the 5 whys. And it's not that you're trying to get the answer, you're just trying to expand your view of the problem. So hopefully you've got some of this out of the open planning process, knowing kind of just what kind of questions you need to ask. And so the idea is that you've taken one of those chains and you've followed it more, and you've taken one of those and you've followed it more, and down the line until you get something that's within your span of control. Something that you can actually do something about, or someone that you know can do something about. And you've picked a couple of those factors and you've listed it under the sketch. So that's where we are now. Now, you essentially, along the data line, you fold the right-hand side over so that you see Daedalus, and you just ask yourself, what would Daedalus do? Right? So he's a superhero. He's shown up. He's going to solve your problem for you. You've sketched some sort of pain. You have some sort of character in this story that is feeling some pain. It might be you, it might be someone else. And Daedalus is going to come solve that problem for him. So remember, think about what Daedalus represents. The rational, the pragmatic, the technical. So his solutions are probably an artifact, a thing, very rational, very pragmatic. And you can brainstorm some second and third order effects out of that. And then once you've done that, you flip the left side, and you say, what would Icarus do? And think about what Icarus represents. Bold, risky stuff, like someone's probably going to die, right? The problem's going to get solved, but someone's going to die, right? That's Icarus, right? And there's some second and third order effects. Once that's done, you unfold it, you flip it over, and hopefully this is where the magic happens. You imagine that now Daedalus and Icarus together, they're a team now, they're going to come solve your problem, your character's problem, whatever that pain is, they're going to make it go away. And so you're going to storyboard this, right? There's 3 frames, and it's a good story, right? So the combined team shows up, they're going to solve your problem, you sketch out whatever it is, or you note it in the spot for keywords. But then it's a good story, so then like an anti-hero shows up, like someone comes to crump their plan. Right? Maybe it's your boss, maybe it's the big Air Force, it's the man, I don't know what it is, but someone comes up to as an obstacle, and because this is a good story and our heroes win, the last frame is how they overcome that obstacle. And the idea is not that this produces your fully formed Koa. This is just an exercise to get you thinking about a couple ideas, and you can do it different ways, you can do it different times, you can do multiple iterations, but I would recommend telling this as a story to someone else, because we are storytelling airmen. And as you tell that story, you will unlock different parts of your brain again. It's just like drawing lines on paper. Telling it in the form of a story tends to help us be more creative, to see more options. So that's the idea of the worksheet. So that's the first thing I want you to do with this. And there's something practical. You don't have to use it. It's just an option. Here's the second thing I want you to do. I want you to take inspiration from Icarus. I want you to go be bold. I want you to take some risks. I want you to be playful in the ways that will make us better at the serious work of air power. I want you to figure out how to embrace both Daedalus and Icarus, or what they represented, and not treat them as mutually exclusive. I want you to get excited about whatever it is that you do, whether it's flying, or cyber, or space, or force support. I don't care. I want you to be excited about that. And in all those fields, we need people, heroes, who will go out and innovate our culture from the inside out, because it's not going to happen top down. I want you to innovate our culture so that strategic thinking, or playful thinking, is once again honored in our words and embodied in our actions. But be warned, right? If you buy this, it will be hard to promote play amongst defense professionals. Play itself is not necessarily fun or frivolous or defined by freedom, right? Think about playing a sport, or the people at the world-class level. They are deeply engaged. They are empathetic, meaning they know what their opponent is thinking. Right? They are pushing themselves to failure. And they're pushing themselves to see things that others do not see. So I expect a wide variety of reactions to this. Some people will wholesale reject this. I get it, right? So in a moment, I'm going to cue up the sweet 1980s music video, and that's your cue to pull out your phone and write whatever you want in a beep, 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 feedback app. Please make it something actionable that I could do something about. Maybe you're like me. Maybe you're really excited about this, like go out and do radical innovation. Maybe you're somewhere in between. Whatever it is, I want to keep the conversation going. So I will be on stage for the remainder of the period. I'll answer any questions as people walk out. Or come find me. Come find me in my office. Come send me an email, whatever. I'll also post things on social media with this hashtag, Rescue Icarus. So, in conclusion, I want to just say thank you. Thank you for your time this morning. Thank you in advance for the feedback that I hope you give. Again, this is going to shape what I do for the next class, if I do it at all. And thank you for your service. Right? Not only should we be proud of Icarus, but Icarus would be proud of you. So thank you, and have a good morning.